You bring it up like, oh, there's something really interesting going on here. So I call it an aroma fingerprint. These rums have historically commanded a higher price. We'll talk a little bit more about the Jamaicans and the Rums or Schnit in a bit, but they have always cost more, and distilleries have sought to make these higher ester funky rums because people will pay more for them. They're also more expensive to make, and that we'll talk a little bit about the process in a moment, but it's not just a simple decision of like you use this type of cane juice versus this type of molasses. It's not necessarily about we use this still versus that still. It's a very specific process that you go through to accentuate the esters at different points along the production process. And one of those things is a long fermentation period. Again, we'll talk about that in a moment. A long fermentation period, and during that fermentation period, a lot of the alcohol that you would normally get out from it instead becomes more flavor compounds. So if you choose to make a higher ester rum, you're going to get less alcohol. So you're going to have to make more of it to sell as a bottle of rum. So they cost more to make, they cost more to buy. And in the 1950s, we sort of almost lost the idea of high ester rum. The market sort of transitioned to like, we want these very light rums. We want, essentially, today we say vodkas. We want something that doesn't like overwhelm us. Something that's like doesn't have this like rummy flavor to it. And I found this from an Appleton ad in the 1950s or so. If you're one of those people who changed from gin to vodka before the others did, because we're like, now we're like, why would you do that? But at the time, like, oh, you're ahead of the game. And so it said, Appleton Light Rum is tomorrow's drink for the other fellows. It says it mixes fabulously with anything, especially people. There's no odor, no hangover, no problems. So there was a point in time, in dark days of rum history, 50, 60 years ago, where it almost became impossible to find high ester rums in the market, or funky rums in the market. So I'm going to sort of geek out for a little bit on rum spirit science, so you understand like what quantifies a high ester rum. What is this funk? What exactly is it? And this is something that I think is surprising to a lot of people, in that if you take any bottle of spirits, whether it's rum, vodka, rum, whiskey, cognac, mezcal, this is pretty much what's in there. Half the bottle is water, depending on the ABV, but half the bottle is water, half the bottle is ethanol. And ethanol is the booze, what gets you drunk, but ethanol by itself is tasteless. So if you drink pure ethanol, pure water, that's vodka. So all the flavors that you get from a traditional distilled spirit, I'm not talking about like gins or infusions, but all the flavors from a natively distilled spirit. So mezcals, tequilas, rums, whiskeys, things of that nature. Those are the flavors come from the fermentation and the aging, not infused later. But all of those flavor compounds are a very, very tiny percent. Typically less than 1% of that bottle is actual chemicals, the actual aroma chemicals that we perceive of as flavor. And so this is a chart. People love this chart, I do too. This is a chart of esters. And esters are one of the principal flavor components in a distilled spirit. And any distilled spirit has esters in it. And this chart is in my book, by the way. But I think it's a great teaching tool. And the idea of an ester is a chemical compound that's formed by combining an alcohol with an acid. And that's all an ester is, really. It's an alcohol and an acid. But then you have to realize that there are many different types of alcohols, and there's many different types of acids. And so in terms of the the alcohols, for example, methyl alcohol, which is bad, that's the stuff that will make you go blind. When you distill, you're trying to get rid of the methanol. You have ethyl alcohol, that's the good stuff that makes us drunk. Propyl alcohol, 2-methyl propyl alcohol, butyl alcohol, Isopropyl is another type of alcohol, but there's these different types of alcohols that can bind with different types of acids. So, butyric acid, propionic acid, silicic acid, basically for each unique combination of an alcohol and an acid, you're going to get a specific type of ester, and that ester is going to have the characteristics of the fruit or coconut or other things that you see there. So the most common ester of all the esters is called ethyl acetate. So it's a combination of ethyl alcohol, ethanol, and acetic acid. Does anybody know what acetic acid is? When we drink acetic acid? Vinegar? Vinegar, exactly. So that's ethyl acetate. That's the most dominant ester by far. It's also probably the least interesting, or it's among the less interesting ones. One of my favorite esters is ethyl butyrate, and so it's ethyl alcohol and butyric acid. That's the smell of pineapple. Interestingly, if you took butyric acid by itself and smelled it, it would smell of baby vomit. So baby vomit plus alcohol becomes pineapple. So that's esters. And so where are these esters created? It turns out they're actually created at every stage of the production process. They're created, especially created during fermentation. And in the Jamaican, high ester Jamaican process, they create a fermentation that lasts a very long time. They put other compounds like dunder and muck, that's a different topic, but they put these dunder and muck, things that are create a process that during fermentation, this crazy amount of esters are made. But esters can also form during distillation. The heat of the still can help fuse together more acids and alcohols, and so you will actually get some amount of ester, it's called esterification, will happen during distillation. And then surprisingly, you can actually get them during aging. That during the aging process, the ester level of a rum can double, triple, quadruple. In fact, there was an article I wrote where there was a rum that I would give a sample of a rum, and the ester level is measured at like 90. That was measured at 90 when it was distilled, but after it had been in a cask for 18 years, again, in the cask there's still acids, there's still alcohols continue to combine, and after 18 years the ester level was closer to 280. So that flavor of the rum had evolved substantially over time. So esters are created at every point of the production process. Now, esters are an important part of the story, and this is what we tend to focus on. Sort of like they're easy enough to understand. But there's actually many different compounds that the flavor of your distilled spirit comes from. So this is an incomplete list. It's actually a typical spirit will have hundreds of different volatile compounds. The word volatile essentially means they boil at a lower temperature than water. So they actually, when you distill, those volatile compounds come through the still. And the art of distilling is trying to capture the good ones and not capture the not flavorful ones. So I'm not even going to try to explain all of these, but in there you'll see a combination of, there are some esters in there, like methyl acetate, but then there's also some pure alcohols. Somewhere there's a pure butanol, for example. But then there's other chemical compounds called aldehydes and phenolic compounds, like glycol, for example, is a phenolic compound, and those are the things of like syrup, like smoky or syrupy or whatever, vanilla, all these, there's a whole stew of these volatile compounds in there, and we tend to focus on the esters, but there's really a whole bunch of them in there. And this chart over here is what is essentially what you call gas chromatograph. There's actually, we have the science, the ability to take a spirit and essentially pull it apart and tell you which of the various volatile compounds in there. So, like given like number one there, that's the acetaldehyde. And just incredibly geeky, but as you sort of, if you basically go from left to right, it's essentially showing you the boiling point. So things over here would volatilize at a very low temperature. Over here, things that volatilize at a higher temperature. There's a whole bunch of science in there. I won't attempt to go in here, but the nerds really sort of have their head wrapped around this stuff. So let's jump in a little bit about how high ester rum is made. Now, if you want to bring out the rum fire, that'd be great. So we're gonna drink a little bit. He's gonna bring out some rum fire, which is a typical rum fire velvet. It's a very typical Jamaican rum made in the high ester style. This is unaged. It's made by Hampton Estate, who is famous for making, in particular, famous for making high ester rums. Thank you. And if I remember correctly, this is lower ABV than the actual like straight rum fire. But you still, if you nose it, you get that sort of incredible, like unmistakably funky note. And I think for me, it smells of a very ripe banana. For other people, something else. But like you immediately recognize this is Jamaican rum. So, about how traditionally high ester rum is made. For one thing, typically has very rustic conditions. So if you wander around Hampton Estate or some of the other, or Long Pond, for example, they're very old. Nobody is pressure washing this equipment every day, and you don't actually want to do that. If you kept these distilleries super clean, you would actually destroy what makes your rum unique, because those conditions contribute to natural airborne yeast. So they might add yeast, but most of the time there's enough natural yeast in the air that it will start fermenting, and they don't want to do it. They don't want to destroy that, so they leave them the way they are. If it's moldy or it's got gunk on the ceiling, they leave it alone. So there's very rustic conditions, and of course, if you don't know this, you walk in and you're horrified. You can tell a true rum nerd because they'll walk in and like this is. But actually, it's funny. It's like we went to Hampton Estate. I was with a group including Martin Cate, and Martin's like, "I'm never leaving." So obviously the conditions that create a lot of interesting natural airborne yeast, which are sort of unique to that distillery, are one part. Another thing that's often used, you don't have to use dunder and muck, but oftentimes they're used. Dunder is really nothing more than vinasse, what the French would call vinasse. Dunder is essentially what's left in the still after acquired distillation rum. It's got a lot of water, it's got some acids, it's basically a great material to basically put back into the next fermentation run. And if it sounds crazy, it's not, because many of us drink sour mash bourbon all the time. Sour mash bourbon is essentially the same thing as dunder in Jamaican rum. Now, if you hear stories of Jamaican, dunder pits and goat heads and things like that, that's typically what people are referring to as known as muck. And muck is like dunder on steroids. It's essentially dunder plus other things, and it putrefies, and it just becomes like you do not want to touch this stuff. But you put it into your fermentation vat towards the end, and it supercharges the ester creation. So dunder and muck is a big part of it. And then you let it sit for a long time. A typical fermentation at a distillery, for example, like the Cabana Club, or there were distillers, typical fermentation maybe 1 day, 2 days, pretty short fermentation. In Jamaica, these fermentations can go 3-4 weeks, up to 3 or 4 weeks, when they're making a very high ester rum. And then last but not least, typically high ester rums are made batch distillation, so pot stills. If you want to make a really funky rum, you probably don't want to use a column still, which is much better at separating out components like that. So now let's jump in a little bit about Jamaican rum, which is sort of most people's introduction to high ester funky rums. I've ever some images of various Jamaican rums over the years, and I'll just point out today, Smith & Cross, which came out, I think it was 2009. Smith & Cross is, for many people, that first sort of like reintroduction of a funky rum. Because prior to that, if the rums are on the market, like Appleton Estate, for example, a Jamaican rum, they're like, really funky, it's good. I love Appleton Estate rum, but it doesn't have that funk that a rum from the 1930s and 1940s was. And so Smith & Cross was, a project, I think it was between David Wondrich and Eric Seed, of like, we want to bring back the old recipes and make available to the consumer as sort of a funky rum. It turns out Smith & Cross now, is not funky compared to some of the things we now have on the market, but at the time it was a revolution. Slide deck has stopped. Restart my slide deck here. So Jamaican rum, and when people like to talk about Jamaican rum, they like to talk about rum marks. And for a lot of people, when they think of rum mark, they think the mark like Common, Clean, Plumber, whatever, and Continental. If you notice on the Smith & Cross label it said Plumber and whatever in rums. In the early 1900s, the notion of plumber and whatever became associated with specific levels and measurable levels of esters. It turns out those names were originally merchant names, and they had nothing to do with specific ester levels. That's actually the talk. I'm going to be talking more about this with Alexander Gabriel when I'm done here. But these sort of became sort of like the canonical overall Jamaican marks. But the reality is that every distillery has their own set of marks. And a mark, you can think of a mark as like a distinct recipe in the way that a bakery, you go to a bakery and it can make croissants, it can make French bread, it can make pizza dough, it can make all these different things. They have one factory that makes many different recipes. The same with Jamaican distilleries or other distilleries. They make different marks, and they have interesting names. For example, OWH or LFCH or LROK, those are all marks of the Hampton estate. And nowadays they have been assigned ester level range. Like, for example, the LFCH mark is between 90 and 120 grams per hectoliter of absolute alcohol. That's geeky science stuff. If you want to read my blog, you can dive deep on that. But the key thing is that different marks represent different sort of ester levels, different amounts of heaviness of the rum. So Hampton Estate has marked. The Dock mark has kind of become famous as sort of like the heaviest Jamaican rum that you can get. DOK stands for Dermot Kelly Lawson. Long Pond also has a set of high ester, or has a set of rums, different marks there. The TECC mark. If you go to Bellier, sells different marks from Long Pond, so they have a TECC rum. There's actually, all the distilleries have a set of marks. On my website, I actually have a list of all the Jamaican distilleries and their various marks, at least the marks I've been able to find. Here's an example of today. Today we have far more great, interesting rums here. There's DOK, which is a rum sample from E&H Shear in Amsterdam. One of my favorite stories to talk about. I've written about it on my website. I call them rum blenders to the world. There's a talk I'm doing tomorrow on Behind the Brands where I'll talk about people like E&A Shear, the main rum company. But things like Doc, that's an example of the Doc rum from actually at Hampton Estate. Here's somebody who's actually taken a Doc rum, aged it for 8 years. Here's the Bellier bottlings, there's the TECA, TCC. Both of them are just insanely off the charts, heavy and funky. And then single barrel select, they're upstairs there, 1423 spirits. So today, just in the last 10 years since Smooth & Cross came out, today we have this phenomenal range of different Jamaican rums and different levels of funk. And the reason, turns out the reason that the Jamaicans started making these super high ester rums, and the reality is like everybody should try the Doc rum, try a TECC rum, you should try it. The reality is you really don't want to drink this stuff straight. It's so pungent, it's not pleasurable at some point. But the reason it was created, at least as the story is told, is that back in the 1880 or late 1800s, the German market, the Germans decided, hey, we want to create more locally distilled spirits. We don't want to be like importing spirits. Like we can make it ourselves. And so the Germans started imposing very high taxes on imported spirits. And so some clever Jamaicans, distillers, right, wait, we can make rum concentrate. We can basically make a high ester rum, ship less of that to Germany, they pay less import taxes on it, and then once it gets to Germany, they then blend it with their neutral spirit. So like a beet spirit or whatever. It's essentially like, it's cheaper for us to import rum concentrate and then dilute it down with cheap neutral alcohol. And that resulting rum was called rum verschnitt. But that's where the crazy rise from like drinkable rums into like these incredibly high ester rums came from, is this notion of a rum concentrate. And that process, turns out, the process created problems amongst the various distilleries in Jamaica that turns out that H.H. Cousins in 1906 wrote about his process. He created a unique process for distilling even higher and higher and higher esters that he could produce, said 4,000 to 6,000. And that's an insane amount of esters. And it was such that not all the distilleries could do this. So like some distilleries were capable of making these high ester rums and others weren't. And the Jamaican rum market overall was not doing so great at the time, but the distilleries that could make the super high ester rum were doing okay. And so to sort of like level the playing field, the Jamaican rum committee that makes various decisions about things, the Jamaican Rum Committee in 1934, this says 1953, exactly, 1934, basically said the maximum ether content, ether being ester, ether content of rum manufactured on this island shall be, and the same is hereby fixed at 1,600 ethers. So that's where we got, if you hear today, like Jamaican maximum, the highest ester level is 1,600. Not that they can't make more, is that the Jamaican government said, when we export rum, it will not be above 1,600. So Jamaicans can make far funkier rum than that. Question?
Yeah, just what is the unit that is used? 4,000 to 6,000?
What is the what?
The unit.
Oh, the units. Oh, yeah. So the units are that grams per hectoliter HLAA. When we talk about Jamaican. In particular, when we say esters, it really is just a measurement of one thing. It's ethyl acetate, one specific ester, and it's the most dominant ester. But yeah, it's grams per 100 liters of absolute alcohol. So it sort of takes away any issue regarding the amount of water in it or whatever. So there's a whole bunch of science you can read about on my website. So it was regulated. And I'll say this is not intended for drinking. This was not intended for drinking. So here's a slide that I stole from the E&A Shear website. It talks about these are the things that these high ester rums are intended for. You know, they talk about, yes, they sell rum for drinks, but these high ester rums in particular are used for things like flavor, like fragrant, like perfumes and things like that, confectionery, like candy and ice cream, and also for like use in tobacco. So basically these rums are so powerful, like we actually use them as aroma notes or flavor notes in very small amounts in other products. And actually Richard Seal had a fairly epic rant about why high ester rums are not for drinking. So you can find that on my website as well. So that's Jamaican rum. And you know, we all think of that as funky, but the reality is that these high ester rums are not limited to Jamaica. We find them at other places around the world, and we're actually just now starting to have them commercially available. And if you want to bring out the longhand. So let's first talk about Martinique. Turns out there's a distillery on Martinique. There's one distillery on Martinique that still makes a molasses-based rum. And the distillery is called Également. And their rum, their high ester rum, is called Grande Rome. And I wish I could get a bottle. I've still managed to never get a bottle. Never get a bottle, you know, a labeled bottle like this. However, I'm lucky. I do have some samples of Martinique Grande Rome rum, but it's sort of like one of those. I want it for my collection of Le Galion Grande Rome rums. So Martinique makes them, and if I remember correctly, they use a dunder process as well. Could be wrong. Someone tell me if I'm wrong. I believe they use a dunder process as well. And then Reunion Islands. This is what we're drinking now. So Reunion Island, the Savannah distillery there does an amazing array of expressions. And what we're drinking now, if I remember correctly, this is take a picture here. Don't want to tell you the wrong thing. This is the Savannah Longhand, Millésime 2007. So this is would it be about a 10-year aged rum. It's only 46% ABV, and it was aged in a cognac cask. It's 9 years of age. The Savannah Longhand. But yeah, so the Savannah distillery makes this crazy array of rums. The Longhand. Another one called Grande Rome, and then the big nuclear bomb of funk from Reunion Island is the hair. I think it's like high ester Reunion rum. It has some meaning to it. That stuff's crazy. If you ever have the opportunity to try it, you should drink it. But yeah, even this longhand at diluted to 46% ABV is still pretty crazy stuff. But it's still drinkable. Like you can imagine drinking that. I've had this in a glass, and it's just like for me it smells of like cleaning chemicals that have been infused with strawberry candy. It's not a pleasant, you know. And actually the next day I have headaches. And I was like, okay, this is not intended for drinking. So yeah, Reunion Island is another source. And then of course, we have Haiti, Haitian Clarin. It turns out that as Clarin gets more popularity, in particular because of the various belly releases, we think of Clarin as like Haitian rum agricole, like it's made from cane juice. Many of them are, but not all of them. There's the Haitian Clarin, a particular one called Clarin Le Rocher, which is made with sirop de canne, basically like cane syrup. And they also use a dunder process. And you can also see this is not the most pristine, pressure-washed distillery. So it's essentially a Jamaican-style distillery, a very old-style Jamaican-style distillery. And as the story goes, it was actually in the around the time of the Haitian Revolution, some of the Jamaicans actually went over to Haiti to help teach them that production process. And so this distillery remains and continues to make some crazy stuff. And in the US, for example, you can get this for like $40 or $45 a bottle. I don't know what it is in Europe, but again, you want to taste, again, high ester, dunder processed spirit. Clairin Le Rocher in particular. The other Clairins are lovely, but they're not that same sort of dunder process there. And then, this is a particularly surprising one. I just learned this recently when I went to Demerara Distillers Limited. They, and it was funny, like I know most of the DDL pot stills. You know, we read about the Port Morant pot still, we read about the Versailles pot still, the Diamond Coffee still, the Enmore wooden pots, or wooden column still. We read about all these stills, but I'm like, and this happened. This is the swan neck of the Versailles still. But I look over there, like, what's that? Why have I never seen that? And it's the DHE pot still. Anybody guess what DHE stands for?
High ester.
Diamond High Ester. So this is a special pot still. It is a true double retort pot still. And as they told me that this rum, or the ferment for this is actually longer than a month. And that it's actually off-site. Like, they use the same fermentation vats for everything, for all the other stills, but this one is off-site. You can come up with a couple different theories about why that is. The one I want to believe is that the crazy yeast and going on, or the crazy airborne yeast that was going on there, you probably don't want to bring close to your sort of more controlled fermentation that you carefully control exactly what's in there. You probably don't want this crazy stuff anywhere near. So they actually make the fermentation off-site and bring it to the distillery where they distill it in the Diamond High Ester pot still. I was told by Sean Caleb, who has been their master distiller, their range is between 7 and 10,000. So about 6 what the maximum legal allowed ester limit from Jamaica would be. And I asked Sean when I was interviewing him, I said, so where can we taste some of that? And it was nice, they brought me out a little sample of it, which was an amazing experience. But they also said that there's more than a surprising amount of it in the El Dorado 50th anniversary rum. So if you have a couple $1,000, want to try some of it, there's a fair amount of it in the El Dorado 50th anniversary rum. So we have about 5 minutes left for questions. Yes? The DHE still? Yeah.
I assume it's only used for this very rare 50-year-old Eldorado. So which other use would they have?
So yeah, they said there's 7 in the Eldorado 50. Elsewhere, they would not reveal it. I believe when they say in Eldorado 12 or 15, they may put tiny amounts of it in there. Like, they're blending together many different sources, but they would not reveal exactly where it went. But they do make it, and I did taste it. So.
And compared to a dog, for example, a white dog?
So it was definitely reminiscent, like a recollection that had that same sort of like strawberry candy dissolved in cleaning fluid kind of note to it. They seem to like to dilute everything with 20% for nosy, which is a fine idea. But I want to try the full strength stuff. So yes. I'm really loud up here. So yeah. Yes.
For plantation, we have 3 right now. Can you replicate them? Can someone take one of it and try to replicate?
So can you replicate a dunder pit?
And create more, because I understand that the fire, they had problems, for example, with the scale and use the time. Is there a chance we can replicate?
So as the story has told me, and I've not been, she's talking about the Long Pond distillery, which recently had a fire. The fermentation vats were destroyed. The story as I I've been told, I've not been back myself, but they said that the dunder pits themselves remained. And the thing about dunder, and again, people